that DNA replicates semi-conservatively. It was first shown in E. coli. This is the most, you can say, abundant bacteria there is. And other than that, this is the bacteria that has been, you can say, it's like a organism that undergoes a lot of experimental studies in prokaryotes. Okay, this is the organism for them. And then later on, the same thing was experimented in the higher organisms as well, such as the plants and the human cells as well. Now, Matthew Meselson and Franklin Stahl, they performed the experiment in the year 1958. Now, what they did, like, see, just like how you know that you can grow any kind of uh, microorganism on a synthetic medium, isn't it? Because you can control its environment easily. So what they did is that they grew the E. coli in a medium that had the heavier isotope of nitrogen. So they were using ammonium chloride. Okay, two types of ammonium chloride. Normally, what is the normal nitrogen? Like, what is its atomic number?
Ma'am, why did they choose
What was
an
my question?
ammonia?
What was
Yes,
my
ma'am.
question?
I didn't
My
hear you.
the atomic number of nitrogen.
Nitrogen
The normal nitrogen that is used everywhere. What is it?
5. No, ma'am. 7.
Huh? 7 is there, but normally we use the 14, right? 7 is the like its sequence number, right? It's number in
Yes,
the periodic.
7.
Yeah. So now they used the reason why they use ammonium chloride is because you know that in the DNA we have the nitrogenous bases present, right? Now we want to do something which will incorporate then like any one part into its genome. Like how when we grew the viruses on this like medium containing radioactive DNA, this thing, radioactive phosphorus and sulfur, we did that experiment. Same way here, the ammonium chloride is taken, wherein the N15 is the heavy isotope of nitrogen as the only nitrogen source for many generations. So they grew E. coli in NH4Cl that had the heavier version of the nitrogen. The result was that this N15 got incorporated into the newly synthesized DNA. Because obviously E. coli took it, used it from the medium, and thereby the DNA in that E. coli had heavier nitrogen in it. Understood? Now, as soon as it got the heavier nitrogen in it, then it started to, you can say, transmit it to the next generation as well when it divided, when it made, you can say, more multiple copies of the cell. So the reason why they used a heavier isotope that if there is a DNA with N14 and if there is a DNA with N15, you can easily distinguish them on the basis of their density, on the basis of their settling down property. So this heavy DNA molecule, it could be distinguished from the normal DNA by centrifugation in a cesium chloride density gradient. See, for centrifugation, centrifugation is the method wherein you spin things around and then they get separated depending upon their densities, right? The heavier ones
Yes.
at the bottom, the lighter one is at the top. So for that, obviously, you'll be needing some sort of medium. So the medium that is used is the cesium chloride. Clear? So N15
Ma'am,
can
this
hmm,
medium is used for what?
separation. Separation of the N14 and N15. Okay. See, what happens is that you have taken the DNA that has N14 in it, and then you take DNA that has N15 in it, and you do the centrifugation of them both, they will separate accordingly, right? The N15 one will be at the bottom, the N14 one will be at the top, right? So
Yes.
after this first step, then they transferred the cells into a medium with the normal NH4Cl, that is the normal nitrogen, that is N14. And they took samples at various definite time intervals as the cell multiplied. and extracted the DNA that remained as double-stranded helices. Now see what happens is that while they were growing the E. coli, after that they observed several generations, like because you know that bacterial observations are so easy peasy because they grow in 20 minutes, right? They divide in every 20 minutes. So you can clearly observe that whole entire division and then you take out the DNA from it to study. Yeah. Any doubt?
Ma'am, the second part, can you explain what did they do next?
Second part.
Yes, this second.
See, they grew the cells in a medium that had NH4Cl present. NH4Cl, normal nitrogen.
Ma'am,
They
cells means bacteria here, right?
E. coli. Okay, so the various samples were separated independently on the cerium chloride gradient so that we can find out the density of the DNA. Okay, so when the heavier one was spin around, then the band that came, it was settling at the bottom and gave a heavy band, the one with the heavier isotope of nitrogen. Okay, after a while, when this was, like sent into the medium that contained NH, like the normal nitrogen, then a hybrid band was observed after centrifugation. Hybrid band means neither it was very heavy, meaning nor it was settling at the bottom, nor it was at the top, it was right in the middle. And then after yet one more division took place, so they observed that had like two of the bands had the, you can say the same, sort of like a hybrid situation wherein they would have one N15 and one N4. That is the hybrid one. The lighter one is going to settle at the top. The heavier one is going to settle at the bottom. Getting my point?
Yes, ma'am, but
Hmm.
I still didn't get what happened in this.
Whichever
After they.
bacterial cell is being grown on the medium, they are taking that medium component into their own genome. And when they are
Yes.
multiplying, they are sending it to the different generations. So when you're growing it on heavier isotope, then the heavier band is observed because N15 is incorporated. When the light, if you just grow them on the normal nitrogen, so light band will be observed, right?
Yes.
But once you take the ones growing on the like the heavier isotope and then you grow them on the lighter isotope, then they will have a mixed band, a band that has one heavier nitrogen and one lighter normal nitrogen. So that is going to tell you that DNA is like the replication process is semi-conservative. Understood? Hmm?
Ma'am, so first they grew in heavy isotope and then they grew in the normal isotope.
Hmm.
Ma'am, did they take the heavy, the ones that they grew in the heavy one into the normal isotope?
Yeah. That is why the normal also got incorporated. And when the replication took place, one was the heavier strand, one was the lighter strand. Understood? So
Ma'am,
the
after 40 minutes, what happened?
both the kinds of bands were observed. That light bands were also observed, meaning the ones that you just grew on the normal nitrogen, and then the ones that you
Ma'am,
grew on
after 40 minutes, which isotope did they grow on with medium?
the ones that you grew on the normal nitrogen, they also appeared, and the ones that had a mix, earlier grown on heavier, then grown on normal, so they had a mix of. Clear? Both of them got
Ma'am,
incorporated.
generation 2, they grew on normal.
Yeah. Two light bands were observed and two
Yes.
hybrid bands were observed. So thus, the DNA that was extracted from the culture one generation after the transfer from N15 to N14, that is after 20 minutes, had a hybrid or intermediate density. The same thing that I'm telling you, you grew it on the heavier isotope, then you grew it on the normal isotope. And then the DNA extracted from this culture after another generation, that is after again 40 minutes, that is the second generation, that had equal amount of the hybrid DNA also and the light. So this concluded that DNA replication is semi-conservative in nature. Understood? And the same exact experiment was done in the case of plant also. So this was performed by Taylor and his colleagues, and he did the same experiment on the Vicia faba, that is faba beans, to prove that this replication not only takes place semi-conservatively in the prokaryotes, but also the eukaryotes. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now today, after that topic is done. Now your syllabus portion is done for your test, isn't it? Now
Yes,
we'll move
it's done.
forward and talk about the next thing. So we have completed the genetic code and everything, right?
Ma'am, genetic code only small portion we covered.
Small portion. I told you all the stop codons, initiator codon, universal code, all of that.
Yes.
Right. Now after that you have mutation. I don't know why I've put mutation into it, but it's like, let's just revise. It's from the previous chapter only. So any change that happens in the sequence of the organism, in the DNA, that is your mutation, right? And it is sudden, it is inheritable. And in this case, loss of gene occurs, right? Mutation
Yes.
is of two types, point mutation and frame shift. Can you tell me the difference between them two?
Ma'am, point mutation happens at a particular point and
What?
like it replaces, it's replacing.
No. Point
No,
mutation happens at a particular point, and frame shift mutation happens at a frame. No.
no, no. Ma'am,
And
in
there is
point
the loss of
mutation,
just one gene, that is point mutation, isn't it?
yes, ma'am.
Single change is there, either addition, either deletion, that is your point mutation. Frame shift mutation,
Ma'am, insertion, deletion.
huh.
Ma'am, gene at any point can be inserted or deleted, and it could change the reading of the DNA sequence.
Yes, exactly. Now, furthermore, talking about the point mutation, just the best example is the sickle cell anemia, wherein you see that there is a change in the single gene or the single base pair, right? For example, the beta globin chain is affected, where because of which the glutamate gets substituted by valine, isn't it? At which position?
Sixth.
So because of that, sickle cell anemia happens. And when we talk about the frame shift mutation, so here the insertion or deletion of T or its multiple bases resulting in the change in the reading frame. That is what we call as frame shift mutation. Now it could be because of insertion and it could be because of deletion. Now coming on to the structure of tRNA. Now this one is important. Why? Because tRNA has a very, you can say, big role to play as far as the translation is concerned. And translation means protein synthesis. So it has a direct role to play. Now when we talk about the tRNA, so you know that it is called as the adapter molecule and it constitutes about 15% of the total cellular RNA. However many RNA are there, 15% are tRNA. Now, this existence of the tRNA, it was noted by Francis Crick, and it has some other names also, apart from being called as tRNA or adapter RNA. You can also call it as the soluble RNA. Now, what is its main function? Its main function is to read the codes that is present in the sequence of RNA, and
Yes.
it is also responsible for binding of specific amino acids, because you know that proteins are formed from amino acids. All in all, there are 60 types of tRNA that are there. And tRNA, because we are going to study the structure of tRNA, so tRNA exists in two forms. One is inverted L shape, and the second is clover leaf shape. Now, when we talk about the clover leaf shape, this one is your secondary structure of tRNA, and inverted L shape is your 3D structure. See this one, there is the picture. This one is your clover leaf shape. This is the one we study for the ease of understanding. And the first one is your inverted L shape. You see it? It's like an L that is inverted.
Ma'am, where?
This one.
Oh,
Isn't
ma'am,
it?
clover leaf.
Clover leaf is like those leaves. You might have seen it in WhatsApp also, the one that has like this kind of leaf. This is your clover
Yes.
leaf, right? The one that's there in WhatsApp emoji also. So it's like roughly, it's not going to be ditto same, but roughly it looks like if you
Oh,
turn
yes.
it upside down, that's your clover leaf. And this is inverted L shape. L is like this, but this is like this. That is why inverted L. Understood?
Yes.
So these two structures have been deduced. The inverted L-shaped structure is like the 3D structure, the more real structure. The one which we study in order for us to understand is the 2D structure, that is the clover leaf shape. Okay. Now see, if we study the clover leaf shape, now you analyze this particular diagram carefully. And in this, you're going to see that there are two ends. One is the 5' end, one is the 3' end. Can you spot it? 5',
Yes,
3'.
above.
Huh. So now starting from the 5', there are certain loops. Now see, all of the circles that you see, wait, the various loops that you see in the diagram, okay, they are the arms, okay, ARM, arms. They are responsible for different functions, okay. They are loops, you can call it as the arms, and they do various functions. So there are arms from 5' end also. The one arm is there, which is known as DHU arm. And the 3' end also has one arm that is known as the T loop, if you see in the picture. Okay.
Yes. TUC.
The T loop, it's written T chi C. This is chi, the symbol. Okay. It's not U, it's chi. And here it is DHU. So from the 5' end, you have this particular loop, which is the DHU loop. And then from the 3' end, you have this particular loop. And then there is one loop in the middle. Clear? And this thing that is coming out, it is known as the short arm. Now, let us talk about each of these loops. So, the first loop from the 5' end is your amino acyl synthetase binding loop. This is the loop that binds the amino acyl to it. Another name for this loop is DHU loop. The DHU stands for dihydroxyuridine loop. Then from the 3' end, we saw there is TCI loop, which stands for ribosomal binding loop. This is the loop that binds to the ribosome, and it is the first loop from the 3' end.
Ma'am, do their names indicate the function that they perform?
That is what I said, na? Ribosomal binding loop is there, it binds to the ribosome.
Ma'am, the first one.
It binds to the amino acid that is required for this thing, charging of amino acids. You'll see later on. So both of these loops have a function. And then the third loop that is right in the middle, it is the anticodon loop. Now this is the loop that will be, you can say, making complementary codes to what RNA has. Okay, in order to form the protein, complementary codes will be made by the anticodon loop, the one right here. If you see here also, they have shown that this is the mRNA, and to it, whatever complementary codon could be made, that is being done by the anticodon loop.
Okay,
So
ma'am, it's not within the loop, right? It's outside the loop.
it is the loop. They have shown it in largely, but it is inside the loop, within the loop. Clear?
Ma'am,
Hmm.
so in the mRNA, they just form complementary.
In mRNA,
Ma'am, in like they just form complementary bases.
hmm. So
I didn't get the anticodon. Is it in? Inside.
Anticodon loop is a part of tRNA. It's not a part of mRNA. Just like
Oh,
how mRNA has sequences,
yes.
anticodon loop also has sequences. And what it does is that it does the binding or complementary base pairing, because from here only proteins will be made. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So this was the structure of your tRNA. Very important. Now let us see translation. I'll show you one video of translation also. It will be very clear with that. So translation, this is called as the protein synthesis step, or the step to polymerize amino acid. You know that proteins are made up of amino acids, and amino acids are like the building blocks of proteins, right? They are the monomers of the polymer, that is protein. So it is the synthesis of proteins, what we mean as translation. Where does it take place? So it takes place in the ribosomes. Now, remember that the eukaryotic ribosome is ATS type, which has two subunits. Okay, ribosome structure is like this. One bigger
Ma'am,
subunit.
what is ATS?
Will you let me explain? Let me explain, then ask question. See, a ribosome is made up of two subunits. Okay, one is the smaller subunit, one is the larger subunit. Now, each of these subunits, it's not like it is attached. It's not a fixed structure. Smaller subunit is there, bigger subunit is there, and they are brought together to stay together with the help of magnesium ions, Mg2 plus. Okay. Now, both of these subunits, when you do sedimentation with them, like when you do sedimentation, which one will settle down quicker, heavier one or the lighter one?
Heavier.
Heavier one. So, depending upon that, S stands for the sedimentation unit. Okay, it is with respect to the sedimentation that this convention has been given. So there is the larger subunit, which is 60S, and the smaller subunit, that is 40S. And all in all, eukaryotic ribosomes are 80S. Don't add them together, but eukaryotic ribosomes are 80S. Clear?
Ma'am, I don't see how are we relating this to sedimentation in what aspect.
We are relating it to sedimentation because of the S that is there. The reason why 80S, 60S, the name has been given, it is based upon the sedimentation. Now, how and why is not the scope of this chapter, nor it will ever be. Understood? It is just a convention that has been given to tell you that eukaryotic ribosomes are 80S, whereas prokaryotic ribosomes are 70S. There is a difference. Understood? And no matter whether it is a eukaryotic ribosome or a prokaryotic ribosome, both of them are made up of subunits, larger subunit and smaller subunit. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, ribosomes have, like inside the ribosomes, you have different, you can say, places for different things inside the ribosome. So there is a P site responsible for, like, it's the site called as the peptidyl site, which is responsible for aiding in the process of translation. There is the A site, that is amino acyl site. And then there is an E site also, which is called as the exit site. These are the various sites that are present in the ribosome. Each of their functions you will see when you see the step. So now how does the process of translation begin? As soon as the mRNA is formed, it comes out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm for translation. And then
Yes.
when the mRNA encounters with the smaller subunit of the ribosome, then immediately the process of translation is going to begin. Okay. Now you know that in a protein, the bonds that are present, those are peptide bonds present, right? So amino acids, they are joined together by peptide bond. Several amino acids come together in order to form a protein. Now the like peptide bond is not just formed as it is. It requires energy expenditure to be formed. Clear?
Yes.
So talking about the steps of translation, initially what happens is that the amino acid gets activated because amino acids ultimately have to form the protein. So activation of amino acid takes place wherein the amino acid binds with the ATP molecule and they get charged like that. Understood? They get activated as soon as they bind with the ATP because they have to form the peptide bond. Secondly, these activated amino acids, they go and now they meet with the tRNA. So when the amino acids that are activated, they link with the tRNA, then we say that process is called as charging of tRNA, or you can call it as amino acylation of tRNA. You remember that loop of tRNA that had amino acyl synthetase loop?
Yes,
Here.
DHU.
Understood? So whenever the activated amino acid gets linked to the tRNA, we call it as the charging of tRNA. This much is clear?
Hmm. Ma'am,
Hmm?
what does it have to do with that loop?
I think the amino acylation of tRNA so happens at the amino acylation part, na, which has these the enzyme. Amino acyl synthetase loop is there, so that enzyme will aid this process. That is why it's there. Understood? That's the connection. Clear?
Yeah.
And then the formation of the polypeptide chain will begin. Now, this is something extra that I've put. Many a times, ribosome can act like a catalyst as well, meaning it acts like an enzyme in bacteria. Ribosome in our body, in our cell, is like an organelle. But in the case of bacteria, the ribosome can act like an enzyme also. That is 23S rRNA. So 23S kind of ribosomal RNA would act like an enzyme and we call it as the ribozyme. This is just an extra knowledge. Now, just like how you had a transcriptional unit which had promoter, terminator, coding strand, sense strand, all of that. Same way, there
Yes.
will be a translation unit in the mRNA, and it will be the sequence of the RNA that is flanked by start codon and stop codon. Anything that is flanked, for example, if this is your mRNA, flanking means at the beginning you have AUG and at the end have any kind of stop. So when things are present at the start and at the end, we call it as flanking. Clear?
Yes,
Understood?
ma'am.
So now, furthermore, so that is your translational unit. Now the translation, what happens is that the translational unit is going to code for the polypeptide, obviously the protein. Now, apart from this, the translation unit has certain other sequences as well that do not get translated. And those sequences that do not get translated are called as untranslated regions, UTRs. Okay. Now, where are they present? They are present before the start codon and after the stop codon. So before the start codon means at the 5' end also they are present and at the 3' end also they are present. And they say that the presence of these UTRs are required for efficient translation, meaning it will segregate the translation unit from the rest of it. Got it? Meaning this is the particular sequence that is not going to get translated and the sequence after that is going to get translated. That's just how it is. It's just there. You don't know why, but it's there. Now, in the process of translation, there are 3 steps. Chain initiation, chain elongation, and chain termination. Now, for initiation, the ribosome is going to bind to the mRNA at the start codon position, and this one gets recognized by the initiated tRNA. So, initiation happens at the start codon. Now, the ribosome, it starts the elongation phase of translation, and here what happens is that that charged tRNA now is coming near the mRNA and it is bringing the codon to make the, what do you call it, complementary pairs. Because you know that the third loop that was right in the middle, the anticodon loop, it is going to form the anticodons along, like against the mRNA. So that is going to be done every 3 base pairs. Like every codon It's going to move from one codon to next codon to next codon, and thereby amino acids keep getting added at that codon, and a chain of amino acids are made, which gets joined by the peptide bond and then gets formed into proteins against the mRNA. The mRNA is going to stay like that only, but it is going to synthesize against it. This thing, the protein will be synthesized. And once the entire length of mRNA has that amino acids associated with it, like amino acids, they get added and added and added, and then the terminator factor, meaning the release factor, comes, binds to the stop codon, termination is complete. Now what you have is a protein formed. Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is how the process of translation happens. Now let me show you a video so it will be even more clearer. One second. Can you see the video? Like the screen, can you see it?
Ma'am, no video. Just
Here? I'm not
yes, no
seeing the
video.
video. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Tell me if you can hear the video. Can you hear it?
No, ma'am.
No. Now also you can't hear?
No, ma'am.
Can you hear it?
No, ma'am. I can't.
Can you hear it now?
Translation is the
Oh,
synthesis
yes,
of a
ma'am.
protein
Now I
from
can
an
hear.
mRNA.
Now watch.
Translation is the synthesis of a protein from an mRNA template. This process involves several key molecules, including mRNA, the small and large subunits of the ribosome, tRNA,
See, tRNA, they are showing the 3D view. So this is the clover leaf shape. They are not showing the 2D RNA. Sorry, tRNA. Okay, it's showing
Ma'am,
the 3D.
this does. Is this the clover leaf?
Yeah. No, no, no. This is inverted L, not clover leaf.
Oh, yes.
and finally, the release factor. The process is broken into 3 stages: initiation, elongation, and termination. Let's see the process in action. Eukaryotic mRNA, the substrate for translation, has a unique 3' end called the poly A tail.
Why it has the poly A tail?
Ma'am, amino acids.
No.
Huh?
Poly A tail. Why is it?
Is it
This is an mRNA that we're talking about. So why is it?
ma'am 3 prime?
3' end has poly A tail. So why?
Ma'am, what is poly A tail?
Very good. Poly A tail adenylate residues are added at the 3' end, which is called as tailing, which is a post-transcriptional modification.
Oh, yes.
So this is adenylate residues. It's not amino acid. Anything A is not
Oh,
amino acid. Now see.
mRNA also contains codons that will encode for specific amino acids. A methylated cap is found
Why
at the
is this there? Methylated cap?
Capping.
Capping. So what is added?
Methyl, methanol, methanol.
Methylosine, methyl
Yes.
guanosine triphosphates are added, right?
5' end. Translation initiation begins when the small subunit of the ribosome attaches to the cap and moves to the translation initiation site. tRNA is another key molecule. It contains an anticodon that is complementary to the mRNA codon to which it binds.
Okay. Again, it is complementary, right? Whichever
Ma'am,
codons are,
is that the loop?
yeah, anticodon.
The first mRNA codon is typically AUG. Attached to the end of the tRNA is the corresponding amino acid. Methionine corresponds to the AUG codon. The large subunit of the ribosome now binds to create the peptidyl, or P site, and the aminoacyl,
A site,
or A site.
Yes, ma'am.
P site and A site. You
Yes,
remember
ma'am.
peptidyl site, aminoacyl site. That is what it's.
Yes, ma'am.
The first tRNA occupies the P site. The second tRNA enters the A site and is complementary to the second mRNA codon. The methionine is then
Ma'am,
transferred to the A site amino.
the methine, the cap, the red thing that they showed, ma'am, what is
That's
that? The
amino
red.
acid. Amino acid.
Oh,
Whichever
okay.
amino, see, you know that amino acids, they have a sequence. Obviously, genetic codon is there, and mRNA has a sequence. So whichever sequence will be present on the mRNA, the tRNA is going to carry that amino acid, okay, which matches with the sequence. And later on, they're going to join together. Okay.
amino acid, the first tRNA exits, the ribosome moves along the mRNA, and the next tRNA enters. These are the basic steps of elongation.
Ma'am, what happens to
As
that
elongation
tRNA?
continues, the
tRNA goes out. Why nothing happens to the tRNA?
It just goes out and it makes
Now it's
other.
ready for the next.
Yes, ma'am.
Understood?
growing peptide is continually transferred to the A site tRNA, the ribosome moves along the mRNA, and new tRNAs enter.
Here, polypeptide
When a
chain
stop
forms.
codon is encountered in the A
Then the
site,
release
a
factor
release factor
and
enters.
UAG is there, which is a stop
Ma'am,
codon, right?
where is the ribosome here?
The whole entire thing is happening in the ribosome. The blue thing, the ribosome.
the A site
This
and
blue thing.
translation is terminated.
Yeah,
When termination is reached, the
ribosome.
ribosome dissociates and the newly formed protein is released.
Clear?
Yes.
So with this, the process of translation is now complete.
Ma'am, what happens to the newly formed protein?
Protein is formed wherever it is required. Proteins are formed in our body only and only when it is required. When it is required, it is set. Okay. Okay. What is the last thing you've written?
Ma'am, I was writing uh, the process of splicing represents those 2 points.
Oh, see?
Yes. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. Ma'am, done. I'm done.